It is so easy to get distracted. I mean, distractions, they don't just gravitate towards us. It's like we crave them. I mean, it is so easy to get distracted, and not just a little distracted, like for long periods of time. It's like you flip on your phone and open one app, and next thing you know, hours fly by. Or you turn on Netflix and just start just one episode, and next thing you know, hours fly by. We crave distraction. And it's so easy with everything that is around us to become distracted. We crave distraction if we're standing in a grocery line. We'll grab our phone just to help it go by in a way in which doesn't seem, laborious, doesn't seem overwhelming. Or if we're, sitting in a plane, we crave distractions. Or if we're driving, we shouldn't, but we crave distractions. Or let's even be honest, sometimes even when we're sitting in the pews, we crave distraction. And I think there's a lot of reasons in every setting of why distractions not only come easily to us, but why we crave it. Chief among them, though, is this. In this world that we live in, sometimes what we see and what we engage and what we encounter is so overwhelming that we want just something to help us go numb, just something to help us go blind, because what we see in the world around us and what we see in the mirror can be so daunting that all we want to do is to be distracted. Listen, it is easy to get distracted because we crave it. And we are now about ready to dive into Daniel chapters 7 through 12. And here's what I want to say at the very beginning. Oh my goodness, will it be tempting to get distracted? Because Daniel chapter 7 through 12 is filled with all kinds of images that are unfamiliar, not just to us, but to the book of Daniel. I mean, the first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel has been going pretty good. I mean, we had some weird visions with Nebuchadnezzar and some strange dreams, but come on, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, Daniel in the lion's den. Like, we not only know these stories, but these stories connect with us. They ignite in us. But Daniel's chapter 7 through 12, the images get strange. Because we're going to start seeing beasts coming out of the sea. We're going to start seeing rams attacked by goats and little horns talking. And in the midst of all of this unfamiliar imagery, it will be so easy to get distracted, and we might even start to crave it. But here's what I want to tell you right here at the very beginning. Even though the imagery is changing, the message is not. The theme of the book of Daniel is not. For Daniel chapter 7 through 12, it has the same central theme as Daniel chapters 1 through 6. Identity. Who we are in light of who God is. So please, don't get distracted because things are about to get wild. Daniel chapter 7, verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream. Now, Daniel's having a dream, not Nebuchadnezzar, not a king. Daniel is having a dream, and Daniel gets overwhelmed by what he sees. Daniel sees this great sea that is churning, and a sea is a Jewish symbol for evil or chaos. So immediately he's put on edge. And all of a sudden, from this sea emerges 4 beasts. 4 beasts that all have a little bit of a different something. The first beast looks like a lion. And this beast will be standing for the kingdom of Babylon. The second beast looks like a bear, and the bear's kind of lopsided and it has ribs in its mouth. And this bear will symbolize the Medo-Persian Empire. The Medo-Persian Empire. Then we have the third beast. The third beast will look like a leopard. It will be emphasizing its quickness, the rapidity of this beast. And this beast stands for the Greek Empire. And then we see the fourth beast. This beast is not compared to anything in creation. This beast is so terrifying, is so frightening, there is no comparison. This beast stands for the Empire of Rome. Now, here's the thing that's interesting. We've actually seen all four of these kingdoms appear before, but it was in chapter 2 of the book of Daniel. And it was in a very different context because these four kingdoms were not represented as beasts in Daniel 2. They were represented as precious metals. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream that not only will he not share the dream to his wise men, but he wants them to interpret it without him telling them anything about it. And he becomes enraged whenever they decide to sidestep it. And eventually Daniel steps in and says, I believe my God will reveal to me not just the dream, but the interpretation. He prays along with his friends. And God reveals this statue made of precious metals. And the head of gold stood for Babylon. And the silver, the chest and the arms of silver was the Medo-Persian Empire. And then you had the belly and the thighs of bronze, that was the Greek Empire. And then you had the legs and the feet mixed with iron and clay, that was the Roman Empire. So the natural question is, why is it that Daniel talks about the same four kingdoms, but in Daniel 2, they're precious metals? But in Daniel 7, they're now four beasts. You see, Daniel chapter 2 was revealing how these four empires, these four kingdoms, are viewed by humanity. For when we look at them, we see precious metals. But Daniel chapter 7 shows us God's perspective, how God views these same four kingdoms. And when he looks at them, what he sees is malicious beasts trying to counter his kingdom's purpose, trying to conquer his people. And in the midst of this imagery, with these four beasts, Daniel gets distracted by a little horn on the fourth beast. Read verse 8. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little horn, which came up among them, and three of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Now, hear me very clearly. Don't get distracted. I'm telling you, this imagery is weird. And even as we have the four beasts unfold and they're terrifying, now Daniel is distracted by a little horn. But I promise whenever I say, this is about the identity of God and how that shapes our identity. And what I love so much about our God is that even when we become distracted, he works hard to redirect our attention. Look what God does in verse 9. Daniel gets distracted by this little horn, and in verse 9, all of a sudden Daniel says, as I looked, thrones were set in place. And the Ancient of Days took his seat, and his clothing was as white as snow, and the hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. And a river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him, and thousands upon thousands attended him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him, and the court was seated, and the books were opened. What an image. What an amazing moment where Daniel is brought into the very presence of God, where Daniel is taken to the throne room of God and seen a worship service that many of us would kill to see. And how does Daniel respond? By getting distracted. In verse 11 and following, all of a sudden, listen how verse 11 starts. Then I continued to watch because the boastful words the horn was speaking. Wait, what? Like you're brought into the throne room of God and you're still talking about the horn? You're still focused on the little horn that's boasting and saying all kinds of arrogant things? Daniel, Why are you getting distracted? Let's cut him a little slack. Because let's be honest, it's easy to get distracted. We crave it. And I would love to say that the presence of God cures that. But the reality is we can be in the very presence of God and still not see him. Be so overwhelmed with the moment that we long to merely find something else that can make us feel comfortable, that seems familiar, that distracts us and numbs us just for a little bit. And yet I love the fact that we have a God that whenever we become distracted, he works hard to redirect our attention. Verses 13 and 14. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man. Whenever we hear the phrase son of man, we Christians typically think Jesus, and I don't think that's inappropriate. Because even though we're in the book of Daniel, what you're about to see is an image in advance of Jesus' ascension, him coming on the clouds from earth to heaven. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. And he approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence, and he was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. A cure for the distraction was this incredible revelation of who God is. He is the victorious one. He is the sovereign one. He is the one that establishes a kingdom that will not pass away. And how does Daniel respond? Distracted. Verse 15. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. They disturbed you? You just saw Jesus before Jesus lived on the earth. You were just in the presence of a worship ceremony for the Ancient of Days, and you're disturbed? You see, one of the things that Daniel is looking at and seeing is that right now he's living under this first beast, this head of gold, this lion-like beast. But what he sees in that initial vision is that might be where he is now, but it's only going to get worse. And he's overwhelmed. Even in the presence of God, his current situation of the stuff he's going through overwhelms him to the point where he does not see God clearly. Listen, it is easy to get distracted. It is easy to get distracted because we crave distraction. But we serve a God that works incredibly hard to redirect our vision. Verse 18, this messenger is sent to Daniel, and in verse 18 he says, but look at the holy people of the Most High. They will receive the kingdom, and they will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. And Daniel responds with more distraction. Verse 21, as I watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them. Daniel says, I'm focused on the horn because I'm watching the horn destroy God's people. And the angel says, I understand that can be distracting. But verse 27, let me focus you on what the main point is. Verse 27, then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. In the midst of our distractions, God works hard to redirect our attention to the truth of who he is, which ultimately reveals who we are. But we will always have the opportunity to respond to his revelation through his visions, to his scripture, with more distraction. For Daniel ends this chapter in verse 28 saying, I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale. Listen, it's easy to get distracted. even for prophets of God. We crave distractions. But here's what I want to tell you as a way of not just explaining chapter 7, but of setting up chapters 8 through 12. Absolutely, it is easy to get distracted because it is really hard to see God clearly when we do not even pay attention to Him. Even when we are in His presence, it is so easy to overlook who God is because of what we are going through, because of what seems to be crashing around us in this world, because of what we see when we look in the mirror and we are not satisfied. But listen to me very clearly, distractions are cancer. Distractions will never deliver what your heart is craving. Distractions merely take you away from the truth of who God is and who you are. And as we progress through Daniel chapters 7 through 12, I want you to grab onto this truth. However crazy the imagery gets, grab onto this truth that what the book of Daniel is about identity. And the clearer you see who God is, the clearer you will see who you are and how to act. But the enemy would love nothing more than for you to stare into the incredible, unbelievable visions of Daniel and walk away deeply disturbed because you were simply distracted. So here's my plea. Fight the distraction and cling instead to the identity of the Ancient of Days.